Welcome to Tea, Tales, and Talks, where we talk about spooky things, drink some tea, and try not to get too scared. I'm Sarah, I'll be your host.
And I'm Mackenzie, I'll be your co-host.
For these strange and occasionally unsettling tales.
If you like spooky stuff, history, ghosts, ghouls, witches, and mysteries of this world and others, then Tea, Tales, and Talks might be the podcast for you. Join us for all the paranormal tea, haunted tales, and spooky talks. New episodes drop every Monday wherever you get your podcasts.
Until we meet again, our twitchy witchy friends, stay spooky and
don't let your tea get cold.
Research and recording of Canadian creepies happens on the shared land and traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. A key treaty governing this territory is the Dish with One Spoon Agreement. This treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee people binds them to share and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, settlers, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. We all share the responsibility of ensuring the dish is never empty, meaning we must take care of the land and the creatures we share it with.
Welcome, wanderers, to Journey Down the Crooked Path, a place where the stories are stranger, the shadows stretch longer, and the things that go bump in the night might just be listening. I'm Amanda Joy, your guide into the eerie, the forgotten, and the downright bizarre. Here, we step off the well-lit roads of Canadian creepies and venture into the murky corners of history, folklore, and the unexplained, where the whispers grow louder and the truth is never quite what it seems. So let's take a deep breath, watch your step, and whatever you do, don't look back. Once you start down the crooked path, you never know what might follow.
Old Montreal wears its history like a second skin. Cobblestone streets, gas lamps, river fog curling in from the port. It's beautiful, sure, but it's also one of the most densely haunted pockets in Canada. More than 500 documented hauntings are tied to this tiny little stretch of city. 500! That's not folklore inflation, that's the number that researchers keep landing on. And when you walk these streets at night, you can feel it. The places where soldiers once drank and fought still hum with that restless tavern energy. The square where crowds once gathered to watch justice carried out still has a heaviness to it, like the air remembers. And down by the waterfront, near the old chapel, people still talk about phantom bells and the echoes of footsteps that never quite reach the ground. The kind of stories that start with a tragic accident and end with something no one can explain. Tonight, we're stepping back into that world. 500 hauntings, and here's just a few of those stories. Tucked into one of the oldest streets of Old Montreal is Auberge Saint-Gabriel, a stone building with a long timeline behind it. In the late 1600s, Etienne Truteau built his home on that spot. He lived there until his death in 1712. The property eventually passed to Richard DeLong, who opened an inn there in 1754. That same year, it received the first liquor license issued under British rule. Travelers moving along the city knew it as a dependable stop for food, drink, and a place to sleep. Its popularity rose and fell with the times, and by the 1800s, as more inns appeared across the region, the building slipped back into a life as a townhouse. But it didn't stay that way forever. In the early 20th century, a descendant of the original Truteau family received the inn and restored it under its old name. Later owners continued to evolve it, and by the late 1980s, the Beaulay family took over and began shaping it into an upscale restaurant and event space that people know it as today. Inside, the atmosphere leans into its age. Thick stone walls, heavy wooden floors, and wrought iron lighting that gives it that winter evening feel even in the middle of July. Modern renovations added dining rooms, banquet halls, and a basement club. But the bones of the place still feel like the 18th century is just a few steps away. Auberge Saint-Gabriel has been serving food and drink for more than 250 years. If any building in Old Montreal has soaked up that energy of soldiers, travelers, celebrations, and tragedies, it's this one. And according to the people who work there today, Some of that energy has never left. Now, the building carries a long list of ghost stories, but the most popular focuses on a child. One version of the tale centers on fur traders staying at the inn during the height of the trade. In that story, an older trader and a younger rival share the same lodging. The older man believes that the younger trader was cutting into his business. One night, he confronted him and threatened him over prices. The younger man refused to change his approach. Later, the older trader returned to the inn with a knife and attacked him on the upper floor. Wounded, the younger trader moved towards the fireplace, pulling a pouch of gunpowder from his pocket and throwing it into the flames. Blast shook the building and started a fire that spread quickly through the entire structure. In the confusion, the older trader died in the blaze. The younger man escaped into the street only to realize that his daughter was still inside. He saw her in an upstairs window, calling for help while the room burned around her. He tried to reach her, but he couldn't get back into the building. In this telling, the girl died in the fire, and later accounts link her to a child's voice and piano music from inside the inn. Another detailed version was written by student journalist Alex Hutchins in an article titled "A Glimpse of Our Haunted History" for The Concordian on October 30th, 2018. According to this account, Frobisher acquired the property in 1809, and he needed his business to survive the winter until European buyers arrived in the spring. He allegedly hired a local arsonist to burn down a competitor's establishment, instructing him to make sure that the building was empty first. The fire ended up killing 12 workers. Afterwards, the arsonist went to Frobisher and asked for money to leave town. Hutchins wrote that Frobisher took out a knife instead of a payment and stabbed the arsonist. During the struggle, the arsonist's satchel of explosives fell into the fire and detonated, setting Frobisher's own establishment on fire. In Hutchins' narrative, Frobisher stood in the street watching his building burn. His 6-year-old daughter was on the second floor, in the middle of a piano lesson with her grandfather. Hutchins described the grandfather trying to lift the child towards the window to get her out. When the window opened, a rush of air fed the flames and both were killed. Hutchins wrote that Frobisher died a year later from what was then called nostalgia. It was a term used at the time for deaths that were linked to grief, fear, and suicide. The article also mentioned later incidents at Auberge Saint-Gabriel, including unexplained fires, piano music inside the building, and the sound of a child laughing. Now, the historical timeline of the property doesn't match every detail in those stories. Joseph Frobisher acquired the site in 1777, not 1809. The property formed part of a larger complex that included offices, stores, and warehouses for the fur trade. In 1779, when he was 38, Frobisher married 16-year-old Charlotte Joubert, the daughter of a surgeon. They had 12 children, and 3 of them reached adulthood. Frobisher died in 1810 of natural causes. There is a documented fire at the property that occurred in 1768, when Seblever de Bleury lived there. After that fire, he hired mason Jean-Baptiste Coquillard to repair the damage and build a firewall between the 2 sections of the complex. That blaze took place 11 years before Frobisher acquired the property. At the time, he was not yet married and had no children. The 1768 fire also fell 6 years before the inn's liquor license came in 1756, which indicates that the early inn period was brief before the damage. Modern accounts from staff and guests at Auberge Saint-Gabriel describe piano music in empty rooms and the sound of children laughing somewhere in the building. The image of a young girl in a blue dress often appears in those stories as well, usually connected to the upper floor and the idea of a fire in the past. Names, dates, and events attached to those figures shift between tellings, but the core details repeat: a child, a fire, a piano, a stone building in Old Montreal that has seen several centuries of use. In an article for the Exemplar called 13 Most Haunted Restaurants in the World, Christine Van Thul placed Auberge Saint-Gabriel at number 7. She described a story in which a little girl died in the fire and is still present in the building, sometimes linked to unexplained piano music inside the restaurant. From here, the walk to our next stop is short. Leaving the inn's narrow street, the route opens towards the river and the old market square. Place Jacques Cartier sits at the center of that stretch, a wide slope lined with cafes, vendors, and foot traffic that never really stops. It's been a gathering point in Montreal for centuries, and the ground beneath it carries a very different history from the one inside of the inn. Place Jacques Cartier sits between Montreal's old administrative buildings and the waterfront. The slope runs from City Hall to Notre-Dame Street down towards Rue de la Commune and the entrance of the Old Port. Restaurants line both sides of the street. In the summer, the area is close to cars and filled with kiosks, buskers, and outdoor seating. During the winter, that same stretch is marked by rows of lit trees. The square has held public gatherings for more than 2 centuries. The site looked very differently in the early 1700s. In 1723, Chateau Vaudreuil was built for Philippe de Brigard, Marquess du Vaudreuil. Its formal gardens occupied the land that later became the square. After the fire, Jean-Baptiste de Rocha and Joseph Pierrano proposed turning the space into a public square called New Market Place. In 1809, Nelson Column was inserted there. It remains Montreal's oldest public monument. The square received its current name in 1847 in honor of Jacques Cartier, who claimed the territory for France in 1535. Before the French colonial period, the area was a part of Teotihuacan, a major Mohawk trade center within northern Kanekanaka territory. The location was valued for its access to several rivers and its proximity to the rapids. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which included Mohawks, Oneidas, Owendagas, Cayugas, and Senecas, controlled the region. French colonialists arrived in the 1600s. Many were Latin Rite Roman Catholics, including Jesuit priests, who focused on converting indigenous nations. Tensions escalated after Samuel de Champlain attacked Haudenosaunee groups in 1609. Warfare and the spread of European diseases such as measles and smallpox pushed Mohawk communities away from Teotihuacan while they attempted to protect the territory and respond to the crisis. Conflict between the French colonialists and the Kanekanaka continued until 1701. During the New France era, the square was known as Place des Jesuits. Accounts from that period describe Jesuit priests and their hired enforcers carrying out torture and execution of the Haudenosaunee captives in that location. On May 18, 1642, the colony of Ville Marie was founded on a meadow in Teotihuacan. A Catholic ceremony marked the event, and Jesuit Father Vaillant celebrated Mass at an altar decorated with trilliums and violets. The settlement expanded from that point, eventually surrounding the area that became Place Jacques Cartier. The Jesuit order had been founded in 1534 by Ignatius de la Loya, a former soldier from Spain who became a priest. The early members took vows of poverty and chastity and planned to focus on converting non-Catholic populations. Their writings from that period describe their approach to conversion. In the Jesuit Relations and Allied documents, the section describes the burning of indigenous captives who refused to convert. The text states that prisoners who passed through torture and received baptism were considered to be on the path to salvation. The passage includes lines about a wolf becoming a lamb after baptism. In 1692, the Jesuits purchased a parcel of land north of Rue Notre-Dame. The property measured 646 feet across the front and 120 feet deep. It overlooked the slope leading towards the river. They built a monastery on the site and named the surrounding area Place des Jesuits. The open space in front of the monastery became the location for executions and torture carried out by the Jesuit priests and their enforcers. One documented episode occurred in 1696. 4 Haudenosaunee men were tied to stakes and tortured with heated iron until they died. Historian W.D. Lighthall included an eyewitness account from the event in Montreal. After 250 years, the witnesses described arriving through St. Francis Gate and seeing a crowd gathered at Place des Jesuits. A companion told him that 4 Haudenosaunee captives were about to be burned alive. The execution took place directly in front of the Jesuit monastery doors. The number of indigenous people tortured and killed at Place des Jesuits has not been tallied. The executions carried out here during the New France period were never compiled into a complete count. After the British conquest in 1760, the Jesuit order began to lose influence in the colony. In 1773, Pope Clement XIV supported the British administration's plan to seize the Jesuit residence and replace it with a courthouse. The order was removed from the colony, and the Jesuit priests were not permitted to return to Quebec until 1842. With such an intense number of deaths and torture and just violent acts overall, it's no surprise that this place has been connected to shadowy figures and paranormal activity. Passerbyers and witnesses have reported hearing mysterious muffled chants in Latin or whispered murmurs coming from the cobblestones, particularly near the area where the Jesuit priests once tortured indigenous people. A frequently reported apparition is that of a deranged Jesuit priest dressed in black robes who has been seen by tourists holding a red-hot glowing crucifix. The ghost is known to approach people, including at least one reported incident of an aggressive encounter with a tourist near Nelson's Column at around 1 a.m. The story goes that in 2016, an American tourist staying in Old Montreal walked back towards his hotel after spending an evening in La Village. He had eaten dinner, had a few drinks, and decided to cut through Place Jacques Cartier on his way home. Close to 1 a.m. when he reached the top of the square and stopped at Nelson's Column. He leaned in to study the stone's engraving of worship at the base of the monument. While he looked at the carving, he heard a low speech in Latin. He recognized some of the words from a Latin class that he had taken in high school in New York State. He turned his head to check the area around him. The sound continued. So he moved around the column, keeping his back against the stone while he tried to locate the source of the noise. As he scanned the square, a red glow appeared from Place Vauquelin to the north. The light grew stronger. A figure stood in the center of the glow. The outline looked translucent. Something in the figure's hand produced the red color. He watched the figure move towards him. As it came closer, he saw a black robe and a large crucifix held upright. The crucifix looked as if it had been heated, with the same red color that he had seen from the distance. The figure continued advancing. The tourist tried to step back, but he couldn't move. His legs had locked beneath him. The figure started to increase its pace, and the tourist attempted to call out, but no sound came out of his mouth. The figure reached the edge of the monument's base, and he saw the face clearly. The expression was fixed with a wide grin, and the figure raised the crucifix and moved towards him. Finally, the tourist managed a scream, and a woman crossing the square heard him and asked if he needed help. At this point, the figure was gone. The tourist was sweating heavily, and his heart was racing. He left the square, returned to his hotel, checked out, and drove back to New York State that night. While technically in the nearby St. Henry neighborhood, the statue of Jacques Cartier in that park is also rumored to be haunted, with reports of its eyes following people, mechanical cackling heard at night, and blood-like substances emerging from the monument.
You. Yeah, you. Still haunting the same old fast fashion? Time to dig up something better with Back from the Dead Goods, a Canadian small business where forgotten threads get a second life and sustainability meets spooky. This isn't just upcycled clothing, it's resurrected fashion with an eerie edge. Hand-picked, reworked, and revived, every piece is as unique as a ghost story whispered at midnight. And because you're a part of the Canadian Creepies family, you get an exclusive deal. Use code Canadian Creepies at checkout for 10% off. Find them lurking on Instagram, Etsy, and Poshmark. Links are in the episode description. Give your wardrobe a second chance at life, if you dare. Looking for your next obsession? The Creators Collective Podcasts is your gateway to the dark, the chilling, and the downright fascinating. We're a community of independent podcasts with one goal: to share the best in true crime, paranormal tales, folklore, and unexplained mysteries. Whether you crave cold cases that won't stay closed, haunted histories that refuse to be forgotten, or stories that make you sleep with the lights on, there's a show waiting for you in the collective. And when you join us, you're not just listening to one podcast. You're stepping into a world of creators who love this stuff as much as you do. Check out the Creators Collective today. Follow the link in our show notes to discover your next favorite podcast. We'll be waiting for you. Let's take a moment during this break to talk about something that matters. Something that doesn't get to be background noise. The Anishinaabe-Moan word, Niki Nagana, means we are all related, and we are. But relationship isn't just about words, it's about responsibility. Canadian author Naomi Klein once said, "It is not enough to say that we live on Indigenous land. We have to act as if we do." And one way to do that is by supporting Pay Your Rent, a grassroots mutual aid initiative that offers direct material support to Indigenous organizers across this land. It's not charity, it's rent For those of us who aren't Indigenous to this place, it's a way to show up differently, to redistribute some of what's been taken. The Pay Your Rent Fund started as a one-time request for help in 2018 and grew into a nonprofit called Ni Ki Nagana. Your monthly or one-time donation can help provide food, hygiene supplies, housing support, and resources for Indigenous-led resistance and community care. So if you've ever said, we're all related, ask yourself, are you being a good relative? Visit payyourrent.ca and find out more about how you can be part of something better. Now, back to this case.
From the square, the route continues downhill towards the river. The street narrows again as the slope levels out near the old port. A short walk brings us to the chapel that overlooks the waterfront, a place tied to sailors, departures, and the stories connected to the shorelines. Notre-Dame-de-Bon-Secours Chapel stands at the waterfront in Old Montreal. The current structure dates to 1771 and was built over the remains of an earlier chapel. It sits at the corner of St. Paul Street East and Bon-Secours Street, just north of the market that shares its name, and the chapel is one of the oldest in the city. The origins of the site trace back to the mid-17th century. Marguerite Bourgeois was the first teacher of the colony of Ville-Marie and the founder of the Congregation of Notre-Dame, organized the construction of the small chapel in 1655. She returned from France in 1673 with a wooden statue of the Virgin and Child. The stone chapel was completed in 1678, and a fire destroyed that building in 1754. The statue and reliquary were removed from the flames and later placed above the entrance of the new chapel, which was completed in 1771. After the British took control of Montreal during the French and Indian War, the chapel became a place of worship for Irish and Scottish soldiers and their families. Fundraising efforts connected to the chapel contributed to the construction of St. Patrick's Church, which was the first Anglophone Catholic parish in the city. During the 19th century, the chapel became a destination for sailors arriving in port. The crews would make offerings to the Virgin in thanks for safe travel. In 1849, Bishop Ignace Bourget presented the chapel with a statue of the Virgin as Star of the Sea. The statue was placed on the roof facing the harbor. The chapel became known as the Sailors' Church. The building now contains the Marguerite Bourgeois Museum. The crypt beneath the chapel is an active archaeological site where visitors can see the foundation of the first chapel, sections of the earlier fortifications and artifacts from both the First Nations and the French colonial periods. Can be climbed for a view of the port and the river. In 2005, the remains of Marguerite were returned to the chapel and placed in the sanctuary. Several elements inside of the chapel have become a part of its reputation. The crypt contains the remains of nuns from the Congregation of Notre-Dame. The statue rescued from the 1754 fire remains on display. A painting from 1848 of Theophile Hamel titled Le Typhus depicts the impact of the Irish famine in Montreal and is associated with accounts of unusual activity inside of the building. Visitors have photographed figures through the stained glass windows. Some images show a man in formal clothing and others show a figure in clerical attire. One interpretation links the figure to a priest named M. Godfrey, who sustained a severe injury inside of the chapel in the summer of 1847 while assisting Irish refugees during a typhoid outbreak. He died hours later. In 1652, Paul de Chamadé, Sieur de Maisonneuve, traveled to France and invited Marguerite Bourgeois to join the settlement. She arrived in the colony as the first teacher, and her work included educating French children and instructing Indigenous children in Catholic doctrine, which was a central goal for the organization that had founded the colony. In 1655, Marguerite had organized efforts to build a chapel dedicated to the Virgin. Colonists gathered stones and other materials, and the foundation was prepared. In 1657, a change in the ecclesial jurisdiction placed Montreal under the authority of the Sulpicians, and construction was halted. Marguerite returned from France in 1655 and discovered that the materials collected for the chapel were gone. She continued her work in the colony, and the Notre Dame Society provided her with a stable to use as a schoolhouse. She taught French children, Indigenous children, and the Felice de Roy, the young woman sent from France to increase the colony's population. In 1658, she founded the Congregation de Notre-Dame, a non-cloistered religious community for women who focused on education. The congregation worked closely with the Notre-Dame Society, whose stated purpose was the conversion of Indigenous peoples. The construction of the chapel resumed in 1675. The building was completed in 1678 and became the first stone church on the island. The wooden structure of the Virgin and the Child that Margaret had brought from France was placed inside. In 1676, with the support of the Sculpticians, Margaret established a school for Indigenous girls on the base of the mountain. The French administration considered the school effective in its religious goals and provided funding for further projects. Margaret died in 1700. After her death, the mission that she founded moved from the mountains to join the Sculpticians at Sault-au-Recollet. For the next 2 decades, religious authorities continued their efforts to instruct children from Nipissing and Algonquin nations. In 1754, a fire had completely burned the chapel. The years following the fire were marked by political and economic changes that came with the British conquest. Rebuilding the chapel was not a priority for the clergy. British authorities considered purchasing the land for military barracks. That possibility prompted the Sculpticians to begin reconstruction. Work on the new chapel took place between 1771 and 1773. The structure was built on the foundation of the earlier building. The statue and the requiem were placed above the entrance on St. Paul Street. The chapel served the community throughout the 18th and 19th centuries. Irish and Scottish Catholics attended services there under the British takeover. As immigration from the United Kingdom increased, the Sculpticians began planning a new church for the growing Anglophone Catholic population, and St. Patrick's Church opened in 1847. With this, the chapel became a place of prayer for sailors as the port expanded. Miniature ships were hung from the vaulted ceilings as offerings. The chapel's location near the waterfront made it a familiar stop for crews arriving in Montreal. It also remained a center for English-speaking Catholic communities until St. Patrick's Church was completed. The chapel played a significant role during several public health crises. Cholera epidemics struck Lower Canada in 1832 and 1834. In 1847, a typhus outbreak occurred when a large number of Irish refugees arrived in Montreal. This is where the priest M. Godfrey comes into play. On July 11, 1847, he suffered a fatal accident. He had been tending to the Irish refugees in a fever shed. That evening, he visited the convent and spoke with some nuns briefly, and then he went to the chapel to receive the sacrament. While attempting to open the door on the 3rd floor, he stepped into the empty space where the gallery had once been. The fall measures more than 30 feet. He was taken to Hotel Dieu Hospital and died shortly afterwards. During the same outbreak, Bishop Ignace Bourget contracted typhus. He prayed for a recovery and made a series of promises if he survived. He pledged to restore the chapel as a pilgrimage site, construct a new statue, and order a votive painting depicting the chapel's role during the pandemic. And after his recovery, he fulfilled all of those promises. The painting, Le Typhus by Theophile Hamel, was installed above the main entrance, and it shows a depiction of the bishop and 3 orders of nuns caring for Irish refugees. Now that's the chapel's history. Today, though, tourists have described unusual activity in and around the chapel. On July 2, 2014, a visitor on a ghost tour photographed the side windows of the building. When reviewing the images later, she noticed what looked like a man in formal clothing on the second stained glass window. She asked whether the figure was a part of the artwork or maybe something else, but paranormal investigators have suggested that the figure resembles M. Godfrey, the priest who died after his fall in 1847, and the dark shape in the images may be the torn collar from his accident. The chapel's connection to the port is visible throughout the building. As I mentioned, sailors prayed here before and after long crossings, and miniature ships hang from the ceiling as offerings. Bishop Ignace had promised to install a statue dedicated to the Virgin Mary after surviving typhus, and Charles Daffin created the Star of the Sea statue for the chapel. The larger statue, known as the Lady of the Harbor, was added onto the rooftop in 1892. It faces the port and is accompanied by 2 angels holding trumpets. I bring this up again because there are stories connected to the chapel that include accounts involving the rooftop statue. According to the tale, the rooftop statue was seen facing away from the port during a time of heavy fog. One day, several people on the waterfront noticed that the statue was no longer facing the river, and on that same day, a driver on the nearby streets lost control of his horse. The carriage overturned, and the driver died from his injuries. Later that afternoon, a second accident occurred when a cart near the market struck a pedestrian who died at the scene. By evening, A fire had broken out in the warehouse close to the shoreline. The building was damaged, and several workers were injured from trying to contain the flames. The statue was reported to be facing the port again the following morning. As for Margaret, she was sanctified on October 31st, 1982, during a ceremony at Vatican City led by Pope John Paul II. In 2003, Montreal marked the 350th anniversary of her arrival. 2 years later, her remains were placed in the left altar behind the statue of Notre-Dame-de-Bon-Secours. Shortly after, the remains of Janine Lebert, a recluse known for her devotion, were also placed in the east lateral wall of the chapel. In 2019, an American tourist visiting the chapel described an incident involving the painting Le Typhus. She was looking up at the artwork when she saw the eyes of the typhus victims depicted in the scene open and looking towards her. She reached for her phone to take a photograph, but when she looked back at the painting, the victim's eyes were closed. The chapel, the square, and the historic streets near the port encompass centuries of arrivals, departures, and the countless events that have accompanied them. Each location is rich with its own unique tales, and visitors' guides, along with those working nearby, continue to uncover and share these vibrant details. Montreal's oldest landmarks have always been lively, and the stories connect to them persist and emerging the way they always have. Slightly haunting. We'll pause here for now. If you're listening in Montreal, you already understand how closely these places are situated together. For those outside the city, all of these sites are just a brief walk apart, with history woven into every turn. Tune in later when we resume our walk through haunted Montreal soon. Thanks for joining me for another walk through Canada's Stranger Corners. Canadian Creepies now has a Patreon supporting the show, which means more episodes, more deep dives, and more time spent tracking down the stories that keep this place interesting. If you want to follow along in between episodes, Valerie runs socials on Instagram and TikTok at Radio Valerie and on Instagram at Canadian Creepies. She posts behind-the-scenes clips, location photos, and early hints about what's coming next. For listeners who want even more haunted history and folklore, you can find me on Down the Crooked Path. The show is on Instagram and TikTok as well, with a steady stream of the same kind of material we cover over here, only global. Come say hello, send your own encounters, and help us keep the momentum going. Stay curious and stay creepy.